Move on to the next session, which is on Sri Aurobindo, the social political thinker. This discussion would have had Professor K. Srinivas with us, but he has been unwell, and I will ask Anand to read out his paper to us on Sri Aurobindo's social philosophy.
Well, I'm representing, in fact, not replacing, Professor Srinivas, and he was here in the morning, but suddenly he was not well, and it seems he has taken some over-medication of something, and so he had to get back home urgently. So he has given me his paper, and I would just read out a couple of paragraphs which I thought were pretty central to his article called Social Philosophy of Sri Aurobindo by Professor K. Srinivas. He is the head of the Department of Pondicherry University. Sri Aurobindo is one of the gifted philosopher saints of our Indian tradition. He is more known for his radical interpretation of the Upanishads and for his literary works like Savitri that bear lasting testimony to his philosophical acumen. His originality lies in his novel interpretation of the various traditional concepts of philosophy, which are aimed at providing a spiritual base to his philosophy of spiritual humanism. Like any other contemporary Indian social philosopher, Sri Aurobindo tries to analyze the basic human nature and the place, status, and role of man in society or state. According to him, man's being has inner and outer dimensions. The inner being represents his spiritual component and the outer materialistic. Thus, both the inner and the outer beings are integrated into one single being. The existential crisis encountered by human individuals in the contemporary society are due to the fact that the inner being of man is completely ignored and relegated to the background. The excessive importance given to the outer being of man resulted in the lopsided development of human nature as such. The egoistic desires and the ambitious pursuits to fulfill those desires of human beings, which are basically self-centered, represent the core of man's outer being. Consequently, men fail to distinguish between what is desired and what is desirable. The domination of the former over the latter often results in social disharmony. To maintain perfect social harmony, men must realize the importance of what is desirable for the larger interest of the society in which every individual stands to benefit or gain. Hence, asserts Sri Aurobindo, the need of the hour is to control and transform one's inner nature in order to prepare oneself for the new society, which is an embodiment of altruism. He observes, the erring race of human beings dream always of perfecting their environment with the machinery of government and society. But it is only by the perfection of the soul within that the outer environment can be perfected. Sri Aurobindo's social philosophy is an offshoot of his spiritual humanism or integral philosophy, which is also characterized as socio-spiritualism that provides a synthetic view of life as such. While giving a detailed account of the ascent of consciousness from its base level to the supramental level, he questioned the very foundations of the scientific theories of evolution to propose an alternative theory that not only explains the process of human evolution in terms of the gradations of mind, but also the involution of the pure or consciousness, Satchidananda, According to him, the process of evolution appears to be meaningless unless we take into account the process of involution. Sri Aurobindo's spiritualism is not narrow in the sense that it is neither creedal nor sectarian. His spiritualism not only takes into account the life of the senses, but also rejects escapist tendencies. It rather affirms life and is equally sensitive to beauty and joy. The spiritualism of Sri Aurobindo is not indifferent to socio-political activities and is not bereft of the sense of history. Sri Aurobindo's spiritualism is also conscious of our inescapable involvement in socio-political, economic and cultural life of the society in which we live. It only helps us in transcending the triviality of this day-to-day life pattern in order to make our life more meaningful, authentic, purposeful and perfect. The salient feature of such a kind of spiritualism is that it does not overlook the natural and material base of life and society. All these aspects are integrated into one to arrive at an ideal human society. He concludes with a para saying, the most interesting thing to be noticed in Sri Aurobindo's spiritual or integral philosophy is his concern for man and the natural and social reality in which man lives. Sri Aurobindo felt for man, working for man, and aimed at better and brighter future of man. The real motto of Sri Aurobindo's spiritual philosophy is to inspire man to seek self-realization with a view to achieve self-perfection, which directly or indirectly has its own role to play in human society. I think that's the selected paragraphs from his article. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone. First of all, let me thank Professor Anand for inviting me from Osmania University. Incidentally, I am teaching philosophy in Osmania University, and I happen to be the student of Professor Madhusudan Reddy, the father of Anand. And it was he who introduced me to Sri Aurobindo. And from last 30 years, we work in the Department of Philosophy. I think Osmania University happens to be the first university to have introduced the original texts by Sri Aurobindo, particularly the human cycle and ideal of human unity, as a course subject. So in that context, when the offer from Anand came that I should participate in this seminar, I said it can be a useful thing in the sense I have been teaching this. Incidentally, I picked up this book, particularly Ideal of Human Unity and Human Cycle, for a reason. Because many of may think that it has nothing to do with pure philosophy in the academic sense. But then we realize that, as we always realize, that philosophy has not only one dimension, it has dimensions and dimensions. And the most relevant dimension that Sri Aurobindo's writings, particularly concerning this age, I found this book to be the most important thing. Now, in that context, I started reflecting on this book, as well as the idea in the 5th chapter or 6th chapter. He says, inadequacy of the state idea. Now, well, Aurobindo was rooted in history in the sense he has read a lot, and then he knew what was happening in the Europe and what was happening in the whole world. Now, the best point, the very beginning of the book of Ideal Humanity, he says that yes, unity is must, but then there are dangers to that, there are possibilities to that, and he was not saying it offhand or out of any spiritual vision or anything, but then after a deeper analysis of history, because he looked at the human history, how new unities have been forged, beginning from the Greek And one very interesting observation that he made on the Greek was, Greek could not become one nation, but it became a successful empire. Now that's one very interesting thing, because as a nation it was fighting with itself throughout, but then when it created an empire, and he says it was the first act of unifying, because he says, as the modern historian from the age of enlightenment have been talking of one thing, history doesn't mean history of a nation, history of mankind. In that context, he says the very ethos of the Greek have started looking at this. Then the history of mankind was the known history of a known mankind, because many parts of the world were not known at that point of time. So he could talk, the first great adventure of uniting the world was that of Alexander, who could go. But again, the unity, he never wanted it as a conquest. He says the values of Hellas are the Greek. Now I will come to that little later when I am discussing the European unity. I think the problem is with the time. Somebody should remind me of the time. Okay, so then first he said the unity is going to come, but in the past analysis, he says unity has been coming or trying to be forced upon by military, by ideologies, all these efforts, but they failed. Because the unities which have come on the basis of some kind of force could not last longer. Now, having gone into the deep aspects of history, he started talking of the future. He says, yes, unity is going to come, but what should be the ideal basis of human unity? Now, two things, the whole series of articles that he, Arya was the magazine in which he carried all these articles, I was amazed. He was writing at the same time Life Divine, Savitri, Synthesis of Yoga, and Human Cycle and Ideal of Human Unity. But how could it be possible? Because his vision was very clear. He could see, as we say, he was a seer who could see the truth of the things that are going to come, and his incisive analysis of what happened, what has gone wrong in the past. Now, therefore, in the beginning of the end of the 20th century, when I picked up this book, I said, yes, Aurobindo in 1918, when the specter of World War I was there and nobody could think, and the specter of World War II was looming large at that point of time, he could only say that United States of Europe is possible. At that point of time, every person who is involved with the human history was very skeptical. On what basis he is going to say that United States of Europe, many times United States of US, when many of my students, when I specifically point, is not referring to United States of America, is referring to the United States of Europe. And look, by 90s, Europe became one. And for the first time, however, the attempts have been made from Napoleon, from Hitler, and so on and so forth, on different regions. And even for that Marx, when Karl Marx talked of the unity, now both Karl Marx was also talking of a better world, better in a, it is an ideological, what we say, the agnostic idealism, secular agnosticism or Gnosticism, wherein which he could see the unity of the world, but then again, both of them were talking of one very important thing, withering away of the state. Now, what do they mean by that? And now this is where, when I was looking into the writings of Sri Aurobindo, earlier writings of Sri Aurobindo, he made it very clear that nationalism is a new religion. In his earlier phase, Vande Mataram and other writings, I could see that. But later on, when in this particular book, he became, or at least he could see the pitfalls or the dangers in nationalism. So in that context, when he stated that nation or the inadequacy of state idea, there are two things. Modern, most of the political, and actually I feel that the book Ideal of Human Unity is a book on international relations. It should be the book where people dealing with the international orders should go through it as a primer. like what was Plato's republic to any political scientist. Whoever is talking of a better society or better state, Plato's republic becomes one of the very. So in that context, the new order which is going to come is not talking that this is the possibility or anything like that. It is coming on its force, on its spiritual force, whatever force that you may call, this unity is getting forged. But then he says it should be on an ideal basis. So that extent, he talked of two things. He is not talking of withering away of the state. He says state is inadequate. Because now today we are facing a problem all over, where you see, after the 1947 or 1950s, almost great many countries which were under the colonial rule became independent. New countries, new order, the whole new world came into being, but only few countries like India, take our own neighbor Pakistan and Burma, could not relish or cherish the what we call the enlightened values. Therefore, India today is a very democratic country, and the values that were there, thanks to the foundation of Indian nationalist leader Tilak, Aurobindo is also into that, and then Gandhi and Nehru, all these people. That apart, we are not going into the details. Aurobindo made a very clear statement. He said, things, Indian independence, he said by 1908, he said, it is sure, no one need not work for that. It will come. And it came. So also he says the unity is going to come, and then he said there are types of unities. Much of the unities have come by economic consideration, by political consideration. They may not be, they may not last longer, but the unity that is going to come, which is based upon actually gradually withering away of the state. Today, what are the major issues that we have is gradually state is submitting to a new order. Like Europe has submitted to a new order of European Union. There are problems, but this is, it has become a reality. So also today, almost all the nations, they may proclaim themselves to be very sovereign, but they are gradually giving it to an international order, which is again more judicious. It can't be by pure brutal power. So therefore today when we see at the globalization, today even for that matter, India is gradually becoming a hub or becoming a great member of the World Union, World City. They are submitting, and the reasons are very many practical, ecological, technological changes that have come, all the techniques, all the new things that are forcing us not to remain an insular, egoistic nation. And Aurobindo was very clear on these issues, and he said, state is withering away, because first, he says the state, when we are talking of state, there is a little bit of history involved here. Till the French Revolution, state's legitimacy was divine king theory. Because a king, but with the French Revolution, for the first time, the spirit of republicanism, wherein which for the first time we rejected this, we have put an end to that thing. King is not representing the God. We have done away with that. But now we are talking, we are representing the people. Now, there again, there is a problem. The problem is, yes, everybody says, every person, he says, I am representing the people. I am the will of the people, all shades. Those who really represent the will of people are those who have nothing to do. Therefore, I say a new religion of republicanism has come, which, see, in ancient time, it was the Kashaya Varna, but today you can see in India a new religion with white khadi clad political regimes. But yes, I don't have any problem with that. But what was happening? What is it that we are representing? Do we represent? So therefore, Aurobindo's quote, I think I will end with that quote. Let me read the quote which appealed to me very much. He says, this is a statement by Sri Aurobindo on politicians. And he is not talking about that the politicians are of Indian, or he says all over the world, politicians have the same kind of mentality. Okay, Sri Aurobindo was an active politician, was in forefronts of Indian freedom struggle. Hence, his observation is not an outsider's observation, but that of a seer who was immensely involved in the process of politics. His observation is becoming more and more relevant as our experience in democracy is progressing. It is generally believed that the politicians represent the best minds of the nation, or noblest aim of its highest instincts. But Aurobindo cautioned that it is not the case, and his profound observation, the observation is in quote now. Nothing is of the kind can be asserted of the modern politician in any part of the world. He does not represent the soul of a people or its aspiration. What he does usually represent is all the average pettiness, selfishness, egoism, self-deception that is about him, and these he represents well enough, as well as a great deal of mental incompetence and moral conventionality, timidity and pretense. Great issues often come to him for decision, but he does not deal with them greatly. High words and noble ideas are on his lips, but they became rapidly the claptrap of a party. This disease and falsehood of modern political life is patent in every country of the world, and only the hypnotized acquiescence of the men yield to everything that is habitual and makes the present atmosphere of their lives. Yet it is by such minds that the good of all has to be decided, to such hands that it has to be entrusted to such an agency calling itself the state, that the individual is being more and more called upon to give up the government of his activities. I think this sums up, and he was talking of two things. One, the inadequacy of the state idea, then those who come in this modern state, because modern state is a different state. At least in the olden state, you can say the king, or whatever he was, because he was claiming his legitimacy from the king for his rule over this. But for the first time, we are talking in the name of people, the very aspect of representing. Who is representing what? Now, therefore, when we are saying that the people are represented by one individual, then all kinds of problems will come. And the another important thing he says, the inadequacy of state is it is not able to provide what it assured, what it promised, the security and all these things. And there again he says, for the first time, I could see that state is actually acting like a god. Our expectation from the state is also like that. For every disaster, for everything, we say, what state is doing? Why state should not do this? And people are also asking the same thing. But then we realize that this body, the spiritual body called the state, because we said, okay, look, community and society are the natural institutions, but state is a spiritual institution. The origin of the state comes from the spiritual aspect, and to that extent, these nations fail to do that, to give. And when they fail to give, they are almost assuring everything. There is a discontentment, there is a dissatisfaction, and state in that way is getting a protest. Previously, in the earlier part of the human history, state was threatened by the other state. But for the first time, state is threatened from within because it promised too much and it failed. I think I have taken too much of your time. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.